passage for tonight begins with Jesus returning home to a house not far from where his family lives. His ministry is well underway, and he's gathering crowds who are attracted to the power of how God is working through his words and actions. These hordes of people are pushing in around him, so much so that he and his disciples don't even have room to eat. When his own family hears about this, they set out to restrain him, not to tell him, hey, congratulations, you're off to a great start. Keep up the good work. You're making an impact. Stay the course, Jesus. Keep going where God is leading you. No. Instead, they set out to restrain him, to rein him in. The text gives us a reason why. They try to stop him because people are saying, this guy, Jesus, is out of his mind. Now notice, the passage says that they try to stop Jesus because of what people are saying. I just love that. I had a ministerial colleague. Actually, he was my pastor for the last year and a half I was in college, who I ran into at a continuing education thing some years ago. I asked him how things were going at his new church. And he said, it's going great. We're doing some new things. The church is growing. But I've had a couple of people come up to me and say, some people are saying. And didn't have to finish the sentence. Patrick told me, I want to tell them, listen, I looked up some people in the database, and I can't find them under S or under P. I shot a glance over to him. I smirked, maybe you should try looking at their middle initial. So some people saying that Jesus was out of his mind. I can just hear his mother and his brothers and his sisters talking amongst themselves about that. What are people going to think? How will what Jesus is doing reflect on us? If he just stayed in the carpentry business, like Joseph, we wouldn't have this issue. What will happen to him? They're saying that he's out of his mind, and maybe he is. Perhaps if we pull him away, we can talk some sense into him, help him to tone it down a little. We better try to rein him in before he gets into trouble. The truth is, Jesus was well on his way to getting into trouble by then. He'd already run afoul of the religious authorities by that time, so they show up, the scribes do, from down in Jerusalem, and they literally demonize him. They call him a demon. This, by the way, is what people tend to do when they feel their way of life is being challenged. They say the one who does so is demonic. So the scribes say Jesus must be of the devil if he's casting out demons. He must be evil if he's trying to do away with evil. Now leave aside that makes no sense on its face. Leave aside that it feels a little like throwing something at him to see if it'll stick. Well, if you don't like that idea, how about this one? And if you don't like that idea, how about this one? Or that one? Leave aside all of that and just think about what's gotten them, both the scribes and the Pharisees, so upset in the first place. Let's take a whirlwind tour of the beginning of Jesus' ministry in the Gospel of Mark. He's cast out a demon in the Capernaum synagogue, and people have marveled that he teaches as one with authority and not like the scribes. He's touched a leper to heal him, something the Pharisees would not have done, preferring as they did to remain ritually clean. He's healed a paralytic man by telling him, your sins are forgiven, which gets the scribe's ire up, because who is he, after all, to say that, to forgive sins? It just makes matters worse when the people who witness this healing are amazed and start giving glory to God. He's called a tax collector named Levi to come and follow him, and he's eaten with a whole group of tax collectors and sinners at Levi's house, which makes the Pharisees upset because he's violating holiness codes about who it's appropriate for someone to eat with. He and his disciples have plucked heads of grain on the Sabbath, and when the Pharisees challenge him about that, he tells them that he himself is Lord of the Sabbath, as if to prove prove that very point, he goes on to heal a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath day, but only after asking the Pharisees if it's lawful to do so, to do good and save life on the Sabbath, and hearing them say absolutely nothing in response. They look directly at this man in need, in pain, in need of healing and grace, and they say nothing. As if they cared not a whit for the man's disease, for the man's plight, but only for their particular interpretation of the law. And then Jesus heals the man on the Sabbath for God's sake. And that's when, according to Mark's gospel, the Pharisees and the Herodians start plotting together to destroy Jesus. Now you need to understand that the Pharisees and the Herodians were mighty strange bedfellows. The Pharisees were all about strict observance of the religious law in the face of the Roman Empire's influence. And the Herodians were all about collaborating with Rome, loosening norms, and trying to stay in good with the Roman Empire. Herod was a puppet king, and the Pharisees would have despised him and those who supported him for it. And do you get the picture? The Pharisees could not stand the Herodians. For them to conspire together with Herod's people against Jesus would have gone against their moral code, their very integrity, but they didn't. Why? That's my question. Why? I suspect it had something to do with Jesus challenging their worldview, reaching out to people they would rather have ignored, and extending God's grace and healing to them. People troubled by inner demons, lepers who would have been social outcasts, tax collectors and sinners, men and women with withered hands and withered spirits. And that's all before he got into healing people who were outside of their religion. So the religious insiders said he had a demon. He was in league with demons, as if setting people free from torment and self-hatred and disease and abuse and exclusion were something evil rather than something to be celebrated. He was challenging their very way of life, and they did not like it. About a week and a half ago, David Brooks wrote a marvelous op-ed piece in the New York Times entitled "The Strange Failure of the Educated Elite." In it, he takes on the very notion of meritocracy, the boomer idea that people ascend to their place in society based solely on hard work and merit, not on hereditary status or class. He says that one problem is that it turns out that members of the educated class use their intellectual, financial, and social advantages to pass down privilege to their children, which creates an elite that is insulated from the rest of society. But Brooks writes, the real problem with modern meritocracy can be found in the ideology of meritocracy itself. It's a system based on the maximization of individual talent, and that system unwittingly encourages several ruinous beliefs, including, among other things, an exaggerated faith in intelligence that fails to recognize that great harm has been caused over the last 50 years by some very intelligent people who didn't care at all about the consequences of their actions. A misplaced faith in autonomy, which imagines that individuals are solitary and they're on an unencumbered journey through life towards success instead of being part of and accountable to communities. A misplaced notion of self in which self-concept is based on personal achievement and not on character. And a view of institutions which sees them as something to pass through on the way to individual success, and not as something to adapt and refine and tinker with and try to better as a means of protecting and working toward the common good. That's what Brooks says. Now, to pretend that there is a direct line from the 21st century notions of meritocracy all the way back to first century scribes and Pharisees would be way overstating the case. But I do think that what zings them and us, if we're honest, I think what zings the Pharisees and the scribes and you and me about Jesus is that he calls them to a larger vision, a real sense of the common good, including the good of people who are not like them, who do not worship like they do, who do not observe religious laws like they do. He's calling them not to forget the spirit of the law in their observance of the letter of it. He's calling them to consider the consequences of their actions, to move beyond any sort of spiritual meritocracy into what I would call a radical graceocracy. I think that's what bugs the scribes and the Pharisees about Jesus. It's that he's calling them to a sense of connection to people with whom they'd rather not feel connected, and to a vision of family that is larger than they would have imagined or feel comfortable with. That larger vision of family is what they needed, and it's what we need too. So when Jesus' biological family, his mother and his brothers and his sisters, finally get to the house where he is, when they're standing outside and they manage to get a message into him that they want to see him and speak to him, he looks around at everyone else and says, "Who are my mother and my brothers and my sisters? The ones who do the will of God. They're my mother and my brother and my sisters." In other words, he's telling them, don't hinder me. Do not hinder me. Don't stop me from reaching out to people in need and people in pain. And remember that living in faith is about more than just us and our individual families and our particular communities. It's about caring for the larger human family. So tonight, as we did this morning, we'll be recognizing our graduates. I'll be honest that Brooks' op-ed piece kind of got in my kitchen a little bit when he chided members of the educated elite for giving their young the book, "Oh, the Places You'll Go." As if the whole message of the book is about being a solitary individual you moving through life towards success. I tell you, I looked at the book again, and I read it again, and one more time over, and I have to say it does lean in that direction. But inside the covers of those books, books that we're giving to our high school graduates, are words of encouragement and support and appreciation from members of this congregation. People have supported our graduates through their young lives, being confirmation mentors and friends and supporters and fellow journeyers. The truth is, we never travel on our own. Even when we feel most isolated and despairing, by the way. Did you get that? Even when we feel most isolated and despairing, we never travel on our own. We're part of a larger family of people who care about us. Whether we can let ourselves feel the reality of that or not, we are part of a larger family of people who care about us. And this week, we have to say that. This week, we have to claim that. Like Kate and Anthony and all the other people who were not in the news. Who are my mother and my brother and my sisters? This week, our International Mission Committee voted to send $1,000 of relief money to Guatemala to help in the aftermath of the volcano there. Who are my mother and my brother and my sisters? One of the grants from our endowment this year was to provide reading material in Spanish in the jail's waiting area for the children and families of Spanish-speaking inmates in Fairfax County. Who are my parents and my siblings? Yesterday, a group of Emmanuelites went to and walked in the Pride Parade in D.C. love the post I saw on many people's walls this week. It said in rainbow colors, "For anyone who will have to deal with unsupportive family this Pride Month, congratulations, I'm your family now. Stay hydrated, eat your veggies, and support yourself. I'm proud of you." Who are my mother? And my brothers and my sisters? It's a really, really good question to ask. When parents are being separated from their children, and children are being separated from their parents on the borders of our country. Who are my mother and my brother and my sisters? You know, the litany could go on and on. Here's the good news. Our notion of family is always just a little bit too small at best. And Jesus is always pushing us beyond those boundaries and those borders into compassion and a grace that is based not on some sort of merit. Because grace based on merit is really not grace at all. Thank God that grace is extended even to us.